Garrett Walker was asleep in seat 8A when the Boeing 767 dropped 3,000 feet in 6 seconds. Carts hit the ceiling. Someone screamed. The aircraft rolled hard right. Minutes later, the cabin speakers crackled and the captain's voice came through wet and uneven, as if he were speaking through blood. "If anyone aboard has ever flown fighters, combat pilots come to the flight deck, now." 211 people turned to look at each other. Nobody stood. Garrett stayed in his seat, hands flat on his knees. He was the only person aboard who understood exactly what the captain had just admitted. He was also the one man who had sworn he would never do it again. Garrett Walker was the last passenger to board Flight 1147, and he boarded it like a man walking into a room he had no intention of remembering. 4 weeks of reserve training had emptied him out. He wore an old bomber jacket gone soft at the elbows, army green faded almost to gray, and stowed his rucksack under the seat in front of him instead of overhead. Habit. A bag you might need in a hurry belonged where your hands could find it. Seat 8A. Window. The exhaustion arrived all at once. Before he closed his eyes, he took out his phone. The picture on the lock screen had reached him in week 2, sent from a driveway in Seattle, his daughter 7 years old, holding a soccer ball she had no interest in kicking, grinning wide enough to show the gap where her front tooth used to be. Emmy had reported that tooth over video call with enormous solemnity, holding it up to the camera like evidence. Something in his face loosened. He shut the screen off and buttoned the phone into his chest pocket. Nobody looked at him twice. He was a tall man, with a military haircut and a tired face, and that fit half the men on any flight out of Chicago on a Thursday. But his eyes kept working after the rest of him had quit. He counted the exits without deciding to. When the engine spooled, he heard the change in pitch and knew the throttles had come up before the aircraft moved. 15 years does that to a man. It doesn't wash out. The boy in 8B had an unaccompanied minor tag clipped to his jacket and a tablet he wasn't watching. "Are you scared of flying?" he asked once the seatbelt sign chimed off. Garrett kept his eyes closed. "No. Everybody's a little scared. I used to do this for a living." Theo Linkevist considered that with great seriousness. "Like drive it?" "Something like that," Garrett said, and that ended it, because he was already asleep. He wore his wedding ring on a chain around his neck now, instead of on his hand. He had moved it there the winter after Claire died, when it started sliding off a finger that had gotten thinner without him noticing, and told himself it was practical. It had been practical for 2 years. 40 minutes into the cruise, the airplane shivered the kind of ripple that makes a drink tremble, and nothing else. Garrett's hand closed hard around the armrest, not the motion, the sound. Airframes make a particular noise when air stops behaving a low structural groan under the floor, and he had heard that exact note once before in a headset over a radio 3 years ago. He made his hand let go finger by finger and went back under. 60 feet forward in a cockpit full of afternoon sun, Captain Ray Delgado was talking about rain. He had flown transports for the Air Force for 20 years before he ever wore an airline uniform. They call it moderate. It's never moderate. It's either nothing or it's the end of the world, and the forecast splits the difference, so nobody gets blamed. First Officer Sabine Ochoa was reviewing the arrival with the patience of someone who had heard the speech before and found it comforting. Crosswinds forecast at 22, gusting 30. "That's the other thing about Seattle," Delgado said. "It never blows down the runway." The radar showed nothing at all. Clear sky in every direction, a wide blue afternoon over Montana. Delgado unbuckled his harness and half stood reaching back for the thermos behind his seat. That was when the air let go. Clear air turbulence does not announce itself. It doesn't paint on radar, and doesn't give a crew the 2 seconds it takes to say, "Brace." There is smooth air, and then there is a shear line where 2 rivers of atmosphere slide past each other and an aircraft crossing that line stops being a vehicle and becomes an object. The 767 fell 3,000 feet in 6 seconds. In the cabin, anything not fastened down went to the ceiling service carts, a laptop, 2 flight attendants, a tray of drinks that hung in the air for a full second before gravity remembered its job. A woman in row 19 struck an overhead bin hard enough to open it. In the cockpit, Delgado was out of his harness. He went up then forward, and the edge of the center panel caught him above the right eye. He came down across the throttle quadrant and did not get up. Ochoa had one hand on the control column when it started and never let go, which was the only reason the airplane didn't roll all the way over. Holding on cost her. The column went right and took her arm with it, and something in her forearm gave with a sound she felt more than heard. She got it back with one hand. It took 9 seconds. It was not elegant, and by the time the wings were level, the master caution had lit the panel amber. The center hydraulic system had lost pressure. A whole page of things the aircraft normally did for itself had quietly stopped being available, including the one that mattered. Without center hydraulics, there would be no autoland. Whatever runway they found, somebody was going to have to fly the airplane onto it by hand. Then the cabin altitude warning went off. Ochoa didn't have time to be careful. She pulled the throttles back, put the nose down, and took the airplane out of the sky, the way the checklist demanded an emergency descent to 10,000 feet, where the air is thick enough to breathe. It saved every person aboard. It also meant a jet built to sip fuel at 34,000 feet would fly the rest of the way to Seattle, down in the heavy stuff, burning it 3 times as fast. The clock had started, and nobody in the cockpit knew it yet. Marisol Vega came through the flight deck door with a bruise darkening along her jaw, and found her captain on the floor with blood in his hair, and her first officer flying with one hand gray to the lips, her right forearm bent, where forearms do not bend. Delgado came back for about 40 seconds. He didn't try to sit up. He lay against the pedestal with Marisol's hands under his head and looked at the amber lights, and Garrett would have recognized the expression because it belonged to a man doing arithmetic he already knew the answer to. He reached up. It took 2 tries to find the switch. "This is the captain." His voice went out through every speaker in the cabin, the words coming apart at the edges. "If anyone aboard has ever flown fighters, combat pilots come to the flight deck, now." Then his hand came off the switch, and Ray Delgado went under, and this time he stayed there. In the cabin, 200 people turned to look at each other. Nobody stood. Garrett sat with his hands flat on his knees, understanding every word of what the captain had just admitted. Fighters was not a request for a pilot. Any passenger with a license could fly a straight line. Fighters meant the automation was gone, and somebody up front knew it. And what they needed was a person trained to put an aircraft onto concrete by hand, with no help and no second chance. He knew what that took. He had done it in bad weather over 3 continents. He also knew what it felt like to be the calm voice in a headset reading a procedure correctly line by line all the way down, and to keep reading it after the other end stopped answering. 40 seconds went by. Marisol was moving up the aisle, asking the same question with her voice cracking. Every face turned up to her, and every face turned away. A small hand pulled at Garrett's sleeve. "You said you used to do this," Theo said. Garrett looked at him. Then he unbuckled his belt and stood, and the whole cabin watched him go forward. And when he reached Marisol Vega, he did not tell her he could save anyone. "I've never flown one of these," he said. "You need to understand that before you let me up there." Marisol looked at him for a moment that cost her more than she had to spend. "Come on." Garrett had to step over Ray Delgado to get into the cockpit. The captain lay against the pedestal with a blanket under his head, his breathing slow and wrong, the blood at his temple already gone dark. Sabine Ochoa was flying with her left hand. She looked up at the man in the doorway and said no. "Ma'am, you're a passenger. I don't know your ratings. I don't know your hours. I don't know if you've had a drink." Her voice was thin, but it did not shake. "I'm not putting a stranger in the left seat." Garrett crouched instead of arguing down at her eye-level hands where she could see them. "You're right. 15 years in the Air Force 12 in fighters, most of it in the F-22. 4,000 hours, none of them in anything with 2 engines under the wings. I haven't had a drink." He let that sit exactly as long as it deserved. "But you can't reach the throttles with that arm. You can't run a checklist, and you can't work the radios. And in half an hour, you'll have to do all 3 at once." Ochoa turned her face back to the panel. 4 amber lights. She had been staring at them for 9 minutes. Garrett read them too, and the word center hydraulic system went through him like cold water because he had heard them in a headset 3 years ago from a man who had not landed. "There's a nurse in 12C, Marisol said from the doorway. "She wants to come up for the captain." "Bring her." Rosa Alcaraz had spent 19 years in palliative care, which made her the only person aboard whose profession had trained her to stay calm around something she could not fix. She knelt beside Delgado, put her hands on his skull, and said nothing encouraging, which was how Garrett knew she was good. He watched the instruments over Ochoa's shoulder, because the airplane was about to make his argument for him. It took 90 seconds. The nose came up a degree or 2. Airspeed bled off. Ochoa corrected and the nose came down through a level and kept going. She corrected again, and it came up further than before. Garrett had seen it 100 times in students' altitude traded for speed and speed for altitude in a long, lazy oscillation, every correction from a tired hand, feeding it instead of killing it. Not dangerous yet. In 4 or 5 cycles it would be. Ochoa knew it too, and that was the worst part. She could see exactly what her own hand was doing, and could not stop it, because stopping it took a trim wheel and a throttle and a control column, and she had 1 arm. "Sit down," she said. Garrett was in the left seat in 4 seconds. He had spent 3 years swearing he would never do this again, and the vow lasted exactly as long as it took to swing his leg over the pedestal. Everything about the seat was wrong. In a Raptor, he sat reclined with a side stick under his right hand. Here he sat upright behind a yoke the size of a truck's wheel, 40 feet of aircraft ahead of him and 150 behind. He put his hands on the column and flew it the way he knew how. That was the mistake. A fighter answers instantly, and the discipline of flying one is not making it move, but keeping it from moving too much. Garrett's hands had 15 years of that in them. He saw the nose low and pulled with authority the way you do when the machine is going to argue. The 767 did not argue. It also did not respond. For a second and a half, 250,000 pounds of airplane thought about it, and in that second and a half, his hands decided the input hadn't been enough and added more. Then the nose came up. All of it at once, first input and second arriving together, and the aircraft pitched hard enough to press the whole cabin into their seats, and the speed fell away, and he shoved forward to fix it, and the same thing happened in reverse. Somewhere behind him, a woman screamed for the second time that afternoon. He was flying the airplane into a divergent oscillation with 200 people aboard, and the horrifying part was that every input he made was correct for an aircraft he was not flying. "Let go," Ochoa's voice cut across the cockpit. "Let go of it." "I can't just—" "Don't fly it. Let it fly." Garrett Walker opened his hands. It took everything he had. 15 years of training screamed that an airplane out of trim was out of control, and he sat with his palms lifted half an inch off the yoke while the nose dipped and hung and came back up on its own, and the oscillation drained out of the airframe like water finding level. He put his hands back down. Lightly this time, thumb and 2 fingers, the grip you use on something you're escorting rather than steering. "It's built to want to be level," Ochoa said, her breathing gone shallow and fast. "It has inertia. You ask it for things, and then you wait. Whatever you did before today, half of it will try to kill us. Understood? Say it back. I ask, and then I wait. Behind the flight deck door, Marisol Vega was holding a cabin together with nothing but her voice. The flight deck was manned. The aircraft was under control. All of it was true, and she said it a dozen times, and by the 6th, her own hands had stopped shaking. Then she crouched by the boy in 8B who had stopped talking entirely, which is the thing you watch for in children. The man who was sitting next to you, he's a pilot. He's flying the airplane. Theo Lindqvist looked at the empty seat for a long moment. He was asleep the whole time. I know. Up front, Garrett told Seattle Center what they had in the flat voice 15 years had trained into him. 9 minutes later, another voice came onto the frequency patched in from a building in Everett, Washington. Flight 11. 47. My name is Elaine Ward. I'm a training captain on the 767, 9,000 hours in your airplane, and I'll stay on this frequency until you're on the ground. Who am I talking to? Garrett looked at the yoke in his hands. A passenger. Garrett Walker. F-22 retired 3 years. I've never flown anything with 2 engines under the wings, and I've been in this seat for 12 minutes. There was a beat of static. All right, Ward said, and there was nothing in her voice at all. No shock, no reassurance, no performance of either. Then we go slow, and I tell you what everything is before I ask you to touch it. First, is your autopilot available? Garrett checked. 2 channels. Center system's out. Engage it now. You can't hand fly for the next 20 minutes and do everything else I'm going to ask. It'll hold heading and altitude, and that's all I want from it. When we get close, you'll take it off, and it stays off, because with your hydraulics, I won't trust it below 2,000 feet. He engaged it. The yoke moved a 1/4 inch under his hands on its own and held the wings level, and for the first time, he had 2 hands free. Now give me your fuel. He read it to her. Then the amber lights, the hydraulic quantity, the distance remaining. When he finished, Ward was quiet for 4 seconds, which he understood immediately, because he had been quiet for 4 seconds himself once, with a headset on and a friend at the other end. Okay, you have a fuel problem you don't know about yet. Down at 10,000, you're burning 3 times what you'd burn up high, and center routed you south of the terrain. 3 options. I'll give you all of them, and then you pick, because you're the only one who can see out the window. Go ahead. Spokane. Clear sky, 8 knots, almost straight down the runway, 11,000 feet of concrete. Easiest landing available to you today by a wide margin. It's also behind you. Turning back is 45 minutes, and it puts you on the ground, with less reserve than I'd like if anything goes wrong on the way. Garrett said nothing. Boeing Field. Closest that'll take you. 10,000 feet of runway, but you're heavy. You have no auto brakes, and you'll land fast. I can't promise you stop in it. That isn't a comfortable sentence, and I'm saying it anyway. And Seattle, Tacoma. 12,000 feet of runway, and every emergency vehicle in King County 25 minutes ahead. Also a 500-foot ceiling, heavy rain, and a crosswind of 26 gusting 34. Your airplane's demonstrated limit is 33, and you have no auto land. The rain was already on the windscreen, running sideways across the glass. Beside him, Sabine Ochoa surfaced. She had been in and out for 10 minutes, and this time she came all the way up, her eyes clear in a way they hadn't been since the drop. Spokane, she said. Garrett turned his head toward her. You take the field with the 8-knot wind. You don't have the airplane. You don't have the currency, and you barely have a first officer. Her jaw was tight. You pick what's safe for 200 people, not 1. She had said the last part deliberately, and both of them knew what it meant. On the floor between them, Rosa Alcaraz kept her hands where they were and didn't look up. Garrett asked her anyway, Rosa, give me the truth. Skull fracture and he's bleeding somewhere I can't see, the nurse said. If he reaches a trauma center inside half an hour, he has a chance. Past that, I don't think it matters where you land. That's 1 man, Ochoa said. I know exactly how many it is. Garrett said it without heat. Then he ran it, not the emotional version, the numbers version that had been going underneath the conversation the whole time. Spokane meant turning around. 45 minutes and on the ground with almost nothing left, which meant one approach anyway. If anything went wrong, there was no fuel for a second try either. The easy landing was only easy if it worked the first time, and it bought those minutes with a captain bleeding on the floor. Seattle was 25 minutes. Same number of attempts, half the time, 10 times the medical care. Seattle, Garrett said. Ochoa made a sound that wasn't quite a word. You're wrong about why, he told her. It isn't for him. Spokane buys a nice runway and spends every minute of fuel I have getting there. If I miss there, I've got nothing either. I'd rather have my bad weather close than my good weather far. And if you can't hold it in a 34-knot gust, then I'll have been wrong and it will have been my call. He had not said a sentence like that in 3 years. There had been a hearing aboard, a finding that Major Garrett Walker had executed the emergency procedure correctly and completely. None of it had ever felt like his. You cannot own an outcome you handled by following instructions. Elaine Ward came back on. Understood 1147. Turn right heading 270, descend and maintain 6,000. Then, after the smallest gap, you're the captain of this flight, Mr. Walker. I need you to hear me say it, because from here on you'll make calls I can't make from a building on the ground. Garrett closed his eyes for exactly 1 second and did not open them until the heading was through 280. Rosa spoke from the floor. Is anybody waiting for you down there? My daughter, Garrett said. Things came apart the way things always come apart, quietly and all at once. The center hydraulic quantity, steady for 20 minutes, started moving again. Not fast, but moving. That's not great, Ward said. Your flaps run off that system. Extension will be slow and may stop part way, so start putting them out now, far earlier than you normally would. Once they're out, you're dragging like a barn door and your burn climbs again. And if that system quits, whatever you have at that moment is what you land with. So I commit early, or I might not get them at all. That's the trade. Garrett looked at the fuel, then at the radar, which showed a green and yellow wall of rain sitting exactly over the airport. Starting flaps now. They came out slowly, grinding somewhere below, taking 3 times as long as they should, and the airplane got heavy in his hands and hungry in the same minute. Then the Seattle weather came up on the data link, worse than forecast. Ceiling 400 feet, wind 070 at 28, gusting 36.3 knots, above anything the airplane had ever been demonstrated to handle. He was reading the number a second time when Sabine Ochoa stopped talking in the middle of a sentence. She had been running the approach checklist in a voice that got steadily quieter, and she reached landing gear, and then the card slid off her knee and her head went sideways against the window frame. Sabine. Garrett got a hand on her shoulder. Sabine. Rosa moved from Delgado to Ochoa in one motion, 2 fingers at the throat, and her face when she looked up was flat and professional, and did not lie. Shock. She's alive, and I can keep her that way, but she is done, and she is not coming back before you land. The cockpit had 2 flight crew, and neither of them was conscious. A checklist card on the floor with a dozen items left, and 4 minutes before the descent had to begin. Garrett keyed the interphone. Marisol, I need you up here, now. She came through the door and stopped, because it was one thing to know and another to see it. The captain on the floor at her feet, the first officer slack in the right seat, a passenger in a faded green jacket flying the airplane. They got Ochoa into the jump seat, strapped in tight, and ran a spare harness across Delgado's chest to cinch him to the seat rails, because the landing Garrett was planning was not one a man could ride out lying loose on a floor. Rosa took the second jump seat and kept a hand on each of them. Then Garrett looked at Marisol Vega, 20 years of service, no more flight training than any cabin crew member ever gets, and said the thing he had been dreading. Sit down. I don't fly airplanes. You're not going to. I'm going to fly it. He pointed at the card on the floor. Pick that up. She picked it up. Her hands were steadier than her face. 3 jobs. First, you read that card. I do the thing I say, set you read the next one. If I don't answer, read it again, louder. He tapped the glass in front of her. Second, this number is our height above the ground. From 2,000 feet down, you call it every 100 feet, and you don't stop for anything, including if I'm talking. Third, this is our speed. If it drops below 135, you say speed until I answer. Marisol's eyes were locked on the instruments as if they might move. You are not responsible for this airplane. You're responsible for 3 numbers and 1 card, and if you do those, I can do the rest. What if I get one wrong? Then you'll have gotten one wrong, and I'll still be flying. Read me the card. She read him the card. Back in the cabin, a man in row 14 stopped being able to sit still. He got 2 rows before an off-duty firefighter from Rockford put him back in a seat. It was over in 20 seconds, but the whole forward cabin watched it, and the cabin's nerve began to go. It was the boy who turned it around, and nobody planned that. Theo unbuckled his seatbelt, which he was not supposed to do, and went up the aisle telling people the news 8 words at a time, with the conviction of a 9-year-old delivering information he considers excellent. The man from my row is flying it. He got most of the way to the back before anyone thought to stop him. Nobody stopped him. And the strange thing, the thing several passengers mentioned afterward trying to describe something they had no words for, is that it worked. A child's rumor is worth nothing. But the cabin got quieter row by row behind him, the way a room does when someone opens a window. At 6,000 feet in cloud, Garrett Walker took the autopilot off and flew the approach that failed. He did everything the way it had worked for 15 years. He came in above the glide path because in a fighter, you keep energy in your pocket and spend it at the end. He carried extra speed because speed is life, because in an F-22, you can trade 30 knots for 1,000 feet and get it back with a thumb. He did it without thinking. That was the whole problem. It wasn't a decision. It was who he was. Elaine Ward saw it in the numbers before he did. 1147. You're high. You need 2,100 crossing the marker, and you're showing 3,000. You're also fast. 172. Bug speed is 151. He pulled the throttles back and put the nose down, and the aircraft, 250,000 pounds of momentum, with flaps hanging out, sat there for 4 full seconds, and then began to descend at a rate that lit up the panel. They came out of the bottom of the cloud at 400 feet. The runway was there 12,000 feet of wet concrete approach lights burning through the rain, and it was in the wrong place. Low and to the right, while the airplane was high and fast and pointed at a piece of pavement 3,000 feet beyond where it should have been. The wind hit in the same instant. A gust off the ridge put the right wing down and pushed them further left of centerline, and Garrett's hands did what they had done 10,000 times, which was fix it immediately, and the 767 began to roll and kept rolling past where he wanted it. Sink rate, sink rate. 200. Marisol read her voice cracking down the middle. 100, 100, wind shear, wind shear, wind shear. Go around. Ward's voice came through harder than she had spoken all day. 1147, go around now. Garrett shoved the throttles to the stops and pulled. The engines took a lifetime to answer. The airplane sank another 60 feet with its nose already coming up, and there was a moment half a second less when Garrett felt through the soles of his boots that they were not going to make it. Then the thrust arrived, and the 767 staggered up out of the rain with the runway lights sliding underneath at a height nobody in that cockpit ever put a number to. The warning stopped. The aircraft climbed. Nobody said anything for 6 seconds. Then Ward's voice, careful now. Fuel. Garrett read it twice, because he wanted the second number to be different from the first. That's one approach, Ward said. Maybe, if you fly a short pattern and don't waste a mile. There is no third. His hands were still on the yoke, holding the climb, correcting for drift, while somewhere above them, his mind had come off its mounting entirely, because he had just flown it exactly right. Every input correct, every correction the one he was trained to make, and the airplane had gone toward the ground anyway. Same as the board's finding. Same as the transcript where every line he read to Danny Reyes was the right line in the right order, in a calm voice all the way down to where the transmission stopped. You did everything correctly, Major. There was nothing further you could have done. He had never once believed that sentence was a comfort. It was the opposite. It meant correct was not enough, that a man could be exactly as good as he had trained to be, and people would still die at the other end of the radio. "Mr. Walker," Ward said, "talk to me." He keyed the microphone and did not entirely recognize his own voice. 3 years ago, I talked a man down. Hydraulic failure. I was his flight lead. I was the only voice he had, and I read him every procedure correctly, and he didn't make it. That's why I'm not in the Air Force anymore. The static hung over Puget Sound. Elaine Ward did not tell him it wasn't his fault. She did not tell him he was a hero. Out of everything she could have said, she picked the only sentence that was any use. "Then you know exactly what I'm feeling right now," she said. "And you know exactly what I need you to do next." Something moved beside him. Marisol had picked the phone up off the ledge of the pedestal where he had set it face down without a word when he first took the seat, and she held it at eye level, so he didn't have to take his hands off the controls. The screen lit. A driveway in Seattle. A soccer ball. A gap where a front tooth used to be 9 miles ahead of them, and 40 minutes from expecting her father. Garrett took the chain from around his neck and tucked the ring down inside his collar out of the way. "Read me the card," he said, "from the top." Elaine Ward gave him a pattern 9 miles long, and Garrett Walker flew every mile of it, the way somebody else would have flown it. He came around the north side of the field at 2,500 feet in cloud, and the first thing he did was slow down. Not to approach speed below it to the number Ward gave him, and then 2 knots under, so everything afterward would happen slowly enough for a man to think. "You'll be established earlier than on any approach you've ever flown," Ward said. "On speed on glide path on center line by 1,000 feet, and after that you change almost nothing. Every fix below 1,000, smaller than the one before it. Say it out loud as you do it. It'll slow your hands down." So Garrett Walker talked himself onto the runway. He said throttles back and moved them half an inch and waited 4 seconds for the airplane to notice. He said descending and let the nose settle 2 degrees instead of 5. He said left, of course, 2 right, and turned the yoke 1.5 inches, then held it there and did not add to it, and the 767 crawled back to the center line at the pace of something enormous, being asked politely. Everything in him hated it. 12 years in fighters had built a man who fixed things now, and this landing was the discipline of doing less. He kept his grip at thumb and 2 fingers. Twice he caught his hands closing around the yoke and made them open. Marisol Vega read the card without a stumble in the flat voice of a woman doing the one job in the world she was sure of, and somewhere in the middle, her voice stopped shaking and never started again. Behind them, Rosa Alcaraz sat strapped in with one hand on Sabine Ochoa and the other on the harness, holding Ray Delgado, and she did not speak once because nothing she could say would help the man in the left seat. "Landing gear," Marisol read. "Gear down." The lever moved and the airplane shuddered and got loud. 3 green. Flaps 30. They're at 25 and they're staying at 25. He said it without apology. The center system had given him everything it was ever going to give. Speeds adjusted. Next item. At 5 miles, Ward came back with the part he had never done. Winds 070 at 28, gusting 36 straight across from your left. You'll fly this whole approach with the airplane pointed 12 degrees left of where you're going. It will look wrong. It will feel wrong. Do not fix it. Crab. Crab all the way down. If you try to hold centerline with the wings, you'll run out of aileron and burn your speed off doing it. Her voice tightened. Then, at about 20 feet, not 1 second earlier, you push right rudder and straighten the nose down the runway. That's the landing, Mr. Walker. Everything else today has been getting you somewhere you can do those 2 seconds correctly. In an F-22, he had never once flown an airplane pointed somewhere other than where he was going. The nose was the intention. Copy. Crab to 20. Straighten with rudder. In the cabin, the lights were dimmed, and 200 people sat in the brace position listening to rain hammer the fuselage like gravel. The firefighter from Rockford had moved into 12C Rose's paperback, still in the seat pocket, and sat with his hand closed around the hand of the boy beside him. He was in my row, Theo said to the floor. I know, the firefighter said. You told me. At 2,000 feet, still in cloud, Marisol began to read. 2,000, 1,900, 1,800. There was nothing out the windscreen but gray and water. The runway existed as a needle on a dial and a voice at his shoulder, and Garrett Walker flew toward concrete he could not see, on nothing but numbers. 1,000, 900, 800. Ward said nothing at all. In her profession, that silence was the highest compliment available, and Garrett understood it and had no room to feel it. 600, 500. A gust came off the ridge, put the left wing down and shoved the airplane right, and every nerve he had screamed at him to catch it hard the way he had caught it 7 minutes ago, the way he had caught things for 15 years. He moved the yoke about an inch. Then he waited. The airplane took a second and a half to think about it, and came back and kept coming, and he took the inch out again before it went too far, and the wings came level with the needles exactly where they had been. It cost him 40 feet, and nothing else. 400 feet above a runway in Seattle, a man who had spent 3 years believing a correct procedure and a dead friend meant he could not be trusted with anything, let go of an airplane on purpose and trusted it to come back. It came back. The cloud tore open and the runway was there, black, wet concrete lying at an angle to the nose approach, lights burning white through the rain sitting in the left corner of the windscreen and staying there because Garrett Walker was pointed 12 degrees away from it and holding. 300, 200, 100, 50, said the automated voice. 40, 30, 20. Garrett pushed right rudder. The nose swung 12 degrees and stopped square down the center line, and in the same motion he brought the yoke back. Not much a hand's width, the flare of a man landing something heavy on wet ground with no interest in floating, and dropped the left wing a few degrees into the wind. The 767 hit the runway hard enough that the tires shrieked and the airframe boomed like a struck drum, and every loose object in 35 rows came off the floor and slapped back down. Hard enough that the woman with the broken collarbone made a sound she was not proud of. It hit on the center line on the main gear straight. Spoilers. He pulled the lever, and the wings came alive with panels, and the airplane sat down onto its wheels with all of its weight. Reverse thrust followed both engines, roaring into a sound that filled the cabin, and he stood on the brakes with both feet and kept them there. The runway did not slow the way runways are supposed to. Standing water threw 2 white walls off the gear. The nose wheel wandered, and he held it with rudder, and the end of the concrete was out there in the rain, where the lights turned red. 120 knots, Marisol read because nobody had told her to, and she had decided he needed it. 100, 80, 60, 40. The airplane stopped with less than 1,000 feet of runway left. For 3 seconds, nothing happened in the cockpit. The wipers went back and forth. The engines wound down. Rain drummed on the roof of an aircraft, standing completely still on the ground in Seattle. Then the noise came up through the floor, not applause first, but a low sound, with no shape to it. 200 people making it at once, turning to applause, and not stopping for a long time. The tower had been silent through the whole approach. Now the controller came up and he was not steady. 1147 Seattle Tower. Equipment's rolling. There was a break on the frequency. That is the finest thing I have ever watched come out of that cloud. Say it again for my log who was flying. Garrett Walker keyed the microphone. Passenger, he said. Seat 8A. The fire trucks reached them 90 seconds later, and after that, the airplane stopped belonging to him. Paramedics took Ray Delgado off first on a board down mobile stairs into an ambulance with the doors already open, and Rosa Alcaraz went with him because she had held that man's head for 22 minutes, and nobody was going to argue with her. They came back for Sabine Ochoa. She surfaced while they were working the straps off her, and her eyes found the man still sitting in the left seat, and she got her good hand up and closed it around his wrist. She held on for about 4 seconds and said nothing at all. Then they carried her out. They towed the aircraft to a remote stand, and Garrett Walker went down the rear stairs, while every camera in the state was pointed at the front of it, rucksack over one shoulder, crossing the wet ramp toward a service door, like a man clocking out. Marisol caught up to him halfway. You left this, she said, and held out the phone. He took it. There was a great deal he could have said, and nothing that would have covered it, so he said the true thing. You flew that airplane as much as I did. I read 3 numbers. You read 3 numbers for 11 minutes without missing one. That's the job. Near the ambulances, a 9-year-old boy who was supposed to be with a gate agent turned around and saw him. Theo brought his hand to his forehead in a salute that was mostly enthusiasm and very little form. Elbow-out fingers crooked in the rain in front of 6 fire trucks. Garrett stopped walking. He set the rucksack down on the wet concrete, came to attention for the first time in 3 years, and returned it properly. Then he picked up his bag and went to find his daughter. The terminal was the same terminal it had always been, and nobody in it knew anything yet. Emmy came off the seats by the window at a dead run, with her grandmother 2 steps behind, calling her name, and Garrett dropped the rucksack and went down on one knee and caught her, and she was warm and heavier than 4 weeks ago, and smelled like the shampoo he had bought before he left. He held on longer than he meant to. People walked around them. In the car, she wanted to know why he was late. The airplane broke, Garrett said. Emmy considered this from the back seat, the way she considered everything with her eyebrows down. Who fixed it? He watched the wipers for a while. Rain in the parking garage, then rain on the freeway, and headlights coming the other way. A pilot got hurt and couldn't fly it, he said, so somebody had to try. If you're ever on an airplane like that one, I hope there's somebody on board who stands up for you. That's all it is, Em. Somebody has to stand up. Was it scary? Yes, but you did it anyway. That's the only kind there is, Garrett said. She was asleep before the second exit. The phone rang somewhere past Tukwila, a number he didn't know. Mr. Walker. Elaine Ward. Her voice sounded different without the radio on it, older and tired and human. Captain Delgado is in surgery. They think he'll keep his life. Ochoa needs a plate in that arm, and she's already asking the nurses about her medical certificate, which I'm told is a good sign. Garrett let out a breath he had been holding since Montana. There'll be a hearing, Ward went on. The board the airline are people. They'll want a statement from the pilot flying, and I have to file something tonight. Something shifted on her end papers or a chair. I need to know how you want to be listed. He looked in the mirror. Emmy had gone sideways in her seat with her mouth open, and at some point when he lifted her in, she had found the chain around his neck and pulled the ring out of his collar, and now it was closed inside her fist. 3 years ago, a board had cleared him of everything, and it had not helped, because a man who only follows instructions can never own what happens next. Today he had chosen a runway and a weather and a moment to let go, and he had been the one holding it when it worked. Walker Garrett, he said, Major United States Air Force retired. He said the rank out loud, And for the first time since Danny Reyes went into the ground, it did not cost him anything. Courage is not the absence of fear, and it is not the correct execution of a procedure. It is standing up in the one seat nobody else will take, making a call that might be wrong, and staying in that seat all the way down. He drove his daughter home,